committee to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, INC5. Thank you so much.
To choose one, it will be planet, right? Yet consistently every day we're making that choice and we are tending towards the one that doesn't align with our values, which is plastic. So how do we really decouple that whole situation and then stop, like it or not, we are making a choice, planet or plastic. So I really want to commend everyone for being here, for being a part of this discussion, a part of exploring this topic with us, and really to see which on that scale you're falling on. Together, this opportunity for us to have this discussion, and I'm really excited to dive into it with all of you. The key themes that we're going to be focusing on today is first the severity of the crisis that we're a part of, the life cycle of plastic and what we're really dealing with, and then opportunities for solutions through our policies, through our regulation, and our human rights frameworks as well. What are the roles of government, businesses, and all of us in ending plastic pollution?
So when we're talking about what is happening locally, we also need to think about what's happening globally. So globally, about 400 million tons of plastic are being produced, million tons. In terms of plastics, what is plastics? Plastics is carbon and chemicals. And this is mostly coming from petrochemical based. So in terms of the plastic pollution, also you would need marine litter, plastics litter on the oceans and all that. But it is in the whole life to look into in terms of the extraction of fossil fuels to make petrochemicals, and also the oil and gas. And in terms of production, recycling is the solution, but it is not. Only 10% of plastic which has ever been produced has been recycled. So recycling is not the solution. And also in terms of the plastics, like part of the plastic pollution crisis.
Wow, that was so much to take in. What really stood out for me that sometimes I tend to skirt over, my guess, was when we think about plastics, the thing that we think about most is a new frontier and a new environment that we're in on. And then as you were saying, the growth of plastic is so strong that toxin load is just going to increase and then it's going to accumulate over time for us as well. So this next question then would be looking at the scale of the problem and all the things that we actually don't have eyes on, don't have enough data on. What kind of changes are needed in the production, the use, the waste management of plastic in Malaysia? And this question I would love to hear from all three of you. So
probably I'll just touch on that because I did not mention about the climate change. In terms of production itself, as I mentioned, you have to extract petrochemicals. And then out of that, in terms of production also, all this, there's a release of greenhouse gases. So, and this is also contributing to our climate change. The toxic pollution is also harming our marine life, our environment, and also our human health. And it is also causing problems to our biodiversity. And so how do we manage this? It's a big issue. So how do we manage this? There is, probably we'll be talking about it later in terms of the Global Plastics Treaty. This is our chance to take actions globally. We are calling for an ambitious plastics treaty, and on top of it is reduce plastic production. So that is the first. And as I mentioned about the toxic chemicals, the second one is in terms of, we need transparency on what chemicals are going into the production of plastics. And from there also we need to phase out and finally ban all those hazardous toxic chemicals. I will talk more later, maybe probably give a chance to
thank you, my guest.
YB and
So
Ahmad
Nick,
to touch on it.
Perspective, the source, the production, the use, the management, where do you think we need change?
Well, I think if we go back to the history of plastics, whether we like it or not, first and foremost is that plastic has been with us for quite some time. But for the beginning, it was primarily for the automotive industry, for medical purposes, which I think by and large was quite fine. And it's quite useful. There are reasons why plastics are popular and why we use it so much. But in the 60s, when at that time the price of oil was quite low, then the oil and gas industry were trying to find ways to boost up demand. And one of the ways were the pervasive use of single-use plastics that we see today. And these are things that are pretty much avoidable for drinking bottles, for plastic bags, and so on and so forth. And that, to me, that's the focus, because that's the truly avoidable plastics that we should be focusing on. The challenge for Malaysia has been, we have policies. We have policies towards zero single-use plastics. We have policy on sustainability plastic roadmap. But the challenge has been that it's fragmented, because within ministries, my ministry is in charge of plastics, but we have the local government ministry, KPKT, which is in charge of waste. And then you have MITI, which is in charge of industry, including the recycling industry. And all these three ministries, they have their own circular economy plans, which is good, but it's fragmented. Then you also have, between the federal government, you have the state governments and the local governments. So, for example, Selangor and Penang pioneered with regards towards the polluter pay principle with regards to plastic bags. And we've seen some other states adopting it, and so on and so forth. But other states, for example, do not have such a policy. There is a logic to this problem, in the sense that I do believe that there are places in KL, in Putrajaya, where we should be able to be more ambitious compared to, say, Gua Musang or Miri, or or Sandakan or whatever. But the problem is, when you have so many fragmentation, at the end of the day is that there can be no coherence to the whole policy. So what we are working on right now is to have a national policy or legislation on plastics. Because I think ultimately we are also going towards the Global Plastic Treaty. We need that sort of legislation to bring everything together, and to have a united approach to it. The problem is serious, as mentioned. We are a producer. We use a lot of plastics, but we are also a victim in the sense of a lot of this waste. Europe, for example, likes to complain about deforestation, and we accept that that's a challenge that we face. But they are also, when they can't deal with their plastics, then they send it to Malaysia. And we know that some of it comes in legally through permits, but some of it comes in illegally. And that the illegal part became worse when China became more strict with regards to plastic waste. So it's like, it's a continuous battle that we have, and until and unless we have that legislation, I believe, then only we can approach this in a concerted manner. Our use of plastics is still high. I think we made some progress. After 2018, UBIN, I think, put a strong focus on it. But then COVID happened. Then people who were not using straws were suddenly using straws. People wanted to use bottles again because they felt that that's cleaner, right? And so now we found that there's a loss of momentum. And so we are trying to rediscover that momentum and trying to have a coherent policy, and work with things like, there are things like EPR, design, and increasing recycling. But I agree that we have to have that approach where if it's single-use plastics, if it's avoidable, if it's unnecessary, then we should not use plastics. That should be our focus, because I think there is a lack of emphasis on that matter.
Beautiful. What I'm taking away from that is that there's actually even bring coherence to the momentum forward, but the low-hanging fruit is right there for the picking, and we're not taking action enough on harvesting that fruit. For Edmund, from the human's right lens, where do you see change needed, whether it's the source or the management?
We're talking about the peace, plastic, planet. We also want to emphasize people. So from the Commission's level, we are looking at human rights and how environment intersects with human rights. We are recognizing that people have environmental rights, and those rights must be respected. So the Commission has been negotiating an ASEAN Declaration on Environmental Rights for the past 2 years. And Malaysia chairs ASEAN next year. ASEAN is looking to Malaysia to actually adopt that declaration under our chairmanship next year. So it's a very crucial year for ASEAN not just in terms of the specific issue of plastics, but also environmental rights. I will tell you the problem. A lot of countries around ASEAN still have problems with certain core non-negotiables from our perspective. One is indigenous people. So Orang Asli issue is still not recognized. The Orang Aslis are not, the indigenous people are still not recognized in some countries, not us. Second is the question of environmental due diligence. So the word due diligence is still not accepted by certain ASEAN countries. Thirdly, the issue of grievance mechanisms, meaning you need to have effective remedies. When people are affected by pollution, they need to be able to go not only to the courts, but also they need to be able to find remedies with non-state actors. So the declaration is going to be quite new because there will be obligations that will be imposed on non-state actors and businesses. And that is where the business lobby will be very strong, but also the NGO lobby will have to be equally strong, and government will need to balance those interests. And the last point I think that some ASEAN countries feel very sticky about is the issue of political participation. Participation, free and open participation that includes freedom of information. So these are the issues that I think for the past 2 years, some countries have not been comfortable in adopting. And I just want to leave it there to say that Malaysia, under Nick's leadership, must support a robust, progressive ASEAN Declaration on Environmental Rights and make it a Kuala Lumpur Declaration, because in terms of human rights, ASEAN has had no human rights declaration since 2012. So the 2012 document is the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration that just recognizes in one line, safe, sustainable, clean environment. This new declaration in 2025 that Malaysia has to lead and adopt will be the second human rights declaration, and that will be specifically related to environmental rights. So that is where I want to place where I'm coming from in terms of where I'm sitting. Malaysia, myself, will chair the commission, and we would really like countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, among others, to really spearhead this document. And I think it will be a historical landmark if Malaysia does it as one of our ASEAN deliverables in 2025.
Beautiful, Admin. We tend to focus so much on the management and the of plastic without considering that element. What is Of course, from a citizen's point of view, it sounds like all the pieces are in place, and it's just about playing the move. Between Nick and Edmund, what do you think is the checkmate moment here, and how do we get past that?
I think the checkmate moment is that I used to be Edmund's intern, so I can't really say no to him. But anyway, the real issue is I think there is a greater realization. I think this year, for example, Utusan Malaysia did I think 4 or 5 day feature on the front page on microplastic pollution. And so people are asking that question. And I think when there is awareness, I mean, we like to talk about, awareness, and there is a reason to that, because it's only when you're aware of what's the impact of something to you. And I think one of the things that we tend to forget is, when you talk about climate change, when you talk about the environment, when you talk about conservation, sometimes it's very abstract. It's very idealistic, and let's put it this way, not everyone, is attracted to that. But the moment you talk about how this impacts your health, and I think a wonderful book is by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, Breathe, about how he fights for stricter air pollution regulations. It's just by appealing to this thing about your health, your respiratory health, right? So I think similarly for plastics, we are at that moment where people are talking about it. And finally, I mean, now there's, we have government agencies looking at microplastic pollution. And I think one of the scary part is that realizing how little we know about it. as you mentioned, is that it's just like the tip of the iceberg. And you know a lot about smoking, you know a lot about air pollution, but when it comes to plastics, there's like Rumsfeld said, there's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right? And it's scary of the whole spectrum of that. So that I think will give us the push, because at the end of the day, when there is greater realization, we get asked, we get quizzed at forums like this. It does have an impact. It does push politicians, it does push policymakers to take action, right? If there's no awareness, if there's no push, it's a bit difficult to get everything to move. So I think that is why we are at that checkmate moment, as you describe it. And I think, as I think Edmund alluded to, when we talk about an ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights, I mean, I do think that there's a few countries that can take the leadership better than others. And I think if Malaysia do not show that leadership, then it will take some time. We'll miss some more years for us to achieve that. So I think we cannot miss this golden opportunity, because when we are chair, we decide on what's there on the agenda. We have greater moral suasion on the other countries, and this is a time for us to actually make it matter. And plastics is something that really hurts us across the board. When we have plastics that are from across the world, but even in this region, plastics that are being thrown. We have instant noodles that you don't get in Sabah, for example. You get it in Thailand, but the plastics waste reaches Sabah, and so on and so forth. I mean, even the ones that we throw will reach to our neighboring countries. So that shows that if it's just a national approach, it's not going to go far. We need that regional approach. And for so long, we have this ASEAN way of, you mind your own business. I mean, that's the reality of it. This is a time, and the ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights is a way for us to go beyond our borders and see what we can do together as a region.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that perspective.
I hope, you got so many cameras here, right? I hope what the minister said just now about how Malaysia can take leadership and what he has promised and what ASEAN can do and his commitments. I just learned just now from the younger ones, of course I got so much more white hair than you, right? About how we can make reels, right? Can you make reels about what he just said and then just keep repeating it everywhere? I don't have TikTok because I think TikTok is quite dangerous, but I see that there's reels that people do on Facebook, and then when we use Facebook, people say we are too old, right? Some people are using Instagram, I don't know. Even on Aicha Malaysia, my team, I don't know what they use nowadays. But I just wanted to say I'm very happy that the minister has made those statements. But also I think with this government, of course there are good and bad things. I think on the environmental side, we've now even the intention to have the climate change bill with some of the plans and some of the ideas on climate and environment. We can take it quite far and quite fast, but I think we need also some sort of a top-down approach, because a lot of times what I feel in both the private sector and the public sector is that a lot of those well-intentioned civil servants that are in our government agencies and ministries are sometimes fearful if they want to do the right thing and they want to do the good thing, but they're still sometimes waiting for that kind of political leadership. So I think 2025, if it's just a few months down the line, Malaysia will take over chairmanship from Laos. We have, I think, promised a few deliverables, and hopefully one of these will be led by your ministry in terms of this declaration, and also to see how we can become a bit more progressive in terms of where we are with climate change. So I think the question just now was checkmate, right? I think there is no checkmate moment because we are already seeing it. So I keep saying that you all will live longer than I do. I think the world is already is burning up. There are all sorts of different temperatures and floods and snow and where it's never expected. And there are some ASEAN cities that are already worried about going under, and you have them moving capitals. and hopefully it doesn't happen to Malaysia. But there, in that kind of generation, when I say to businesses that we need to make certain things mandatory, because they just want things about emissions voluntary, they say due diligence voluntary, but you know it never happens when you don't make it mandatory. By the time we talk about mandatory in the next 5-10 years, the world would already have burned. So if you have children, and that's so important because the ASEAN Declaration, we have included intergenerational rights. We have included future generation rights, which again, some countries are not comfortable with, but it's something which I think will secure the future for our younger generation.
Beautiful. What I really appreciate,
Well, I think, I have to be very frank, before I oversell myself. I think overpromise is that, there are bound to be differences. At the government level, there are things that I have to take into account that perhaps might be different at times from civil society. But I think the most important thing is that there has to be communication. So, for example, with the climate change bill, we shared the consultative paper. It's now public. Anyone can go there, can check what's basically the legislation is going to be about. You can give your feedback if you think that it doesn't go far enough or what. And we'll take that into account before we bring it to Parliament, because that doesn't happen all the time with legislation. Similarly, if we have any plastic bill, I do believe that it has to be very public, because the nature of it, and I don't think, I had the same thing that I said about climate change. I sincerely believe that when it's something to do with the environment, it should outlive any minister, any government, right? So if it doesn't go far enough, and you have another government that comes into place and they might not be really interested to further the legislation or whatnot, then you're stuck, right? But if it goes far enough, then it sets that further scope that will, regardless, it makes it a bit more difficult for any government then to pull back. So I think, that's the approach that we have. And we know that we really have to be imaginative and creative. There are low-hanging fruits, but I think we have to, because people get used to it. It's about habits. So if you talk to someone today, they say, hey, pasar malam, pasar Ramadan and all that, they can't get away from plastic, single-use plastic. But then, before this, everyone brought their own tiffin carrier. But it's just that people are used to something, a different habit. So it's not just those who go to very nice malls like this who are very conscious. People were naturally conscious in the past because that was the habit that was there. There were no cheap plastics. So it's just about communicating and about changing how people behave. Even something small as plastic bags. I think when Selangor and Penang introduced it in 2009, I think, there were some complaints, I remember, right? Even for myself, I forget. Then you have to pay. If you were not so friendly to the environment, you bought the plastic bags, right? 20 cents. But now, people in Selangor, in KL, in Penang, who are used to it, find it that it's easier. But I spoke to a retailer. He said when he introduced the same policy, zero plastic bags outside the States, it's a bit difficult because it's something new again. So I think that's the sort of push that we need to go and get people to change the mindset and have some political will. I seriously don't think you're going to lose elections because of plastic bags, right? So just push it a bit, and people will slowly adjust to it. And I think it's about having that that belief that you can make that change, right? So I think the approach that we have to be is that we can change habits, and you have to aim to be a bit more ambitious to push things through.
thank you. Really
Hazardous chemicals in the plastics, because even Malaysia is talking about EPR and circular economy. So if you still have toxic chemicals in the plastic which we are recycling, whatever new product that is coming out is also going to be toxic. Yeah. So another thing that we want is also, as I mentioned just now already, increase the transparency and traceability in the plastics. So it's whatever chemicals that is going in there. And another thing that is being pushed is like as plastic as a waste management issue, and what they are pushing is all these false solutions. They're talking about plastic credits, they're talking about waste incineration, and they don't call it incineration anymore, they call it waste to energy, because in Malaysia and also all other countries, you know, there is communities are against incineration. So it's a new word now. It's waste to energy, and yeah, Malaysia already, the KPKT has already mentioned that they propose to build 18 waste to energy incinerators, incinerators in Malaysia. Yeah, so we are totally against that, because it is not going to be a circular economy. It is not going to be renewable. It is actually not renewable energy, because it is being pushed as renewable energy even in the NETR. So this is not. Yeah, Edmund and I, we were part of the campaign against the Broga incinerators from 2003. Yeah, previously it was Bohol, in Kampung Bohol. So this is some of our calls, no false solutions. And okay, we keep on saying we don't want this. What is the alternative? For us, it is not actually an alternative. It was, like as you had mentioned, it was our traditional practice for refilling and reusing. Yeah? So these are the things that we will have to push for, and it is the responsibility of everybody. Yeah, it's the national government, the industry, yeah, because they still continue to produce all this single-use packaging, yeah, which is totally unnecessary. So when we say no plastics, they come up with other ideas, came up with multi-layered. Yeah, YB had also been promoting no single-use plastic bottles, but there was like Tetra Pak. So that is also very, it's problematic. So no false solutions. We would want to have just transition for people who are also living in this. And yeah, so there's a lot of things that we are demanding, but first is reduce plastic production.
Thank you
Yes,
so much for that, Mages. I feel very well represented by that view. Thank you. Questions from the audience?
Okay, thank you. I think there are a few aspects to this. In terms of Environmental Quality Act, you know, we currently have the EIA. Some of it we can actually amend, and we are looking at it right now, to amend the EIA without even touching the legislation per se, the ACTA, but to go with regards to the regulations, which is directly under the minister as opposed to the act, which you have to go through parliament. Because you know, how do you share? What does you know, what trigger? You know, what sort of level of development does it trigger for a public for an EIA to be shared publicly? So on and so forth. So we are trying to see to make it more. To make it, you know, one is that EIAs are more easily accessible to the public, because now, you know, there are certain projects which goes beneath the radar, or sometimes they're very smart. They cut it into parcels, so they do not qualify. They do not cross the threshold, and they can go about with a huge project with that. So we are trying to work on that. But two, because that one is more immediate, you know. But two is that I think we do need to look into the Environmental Quality Act in itself, because the origin of the act is 1974. It's 50 years. A lot of things have changed. We recently concluded amendment on punishment, maximum penalty for certain environment crimes goes from 100,000 to 10 million ringgit right now. There's mandatory imprisonment of 5 years and all that. But we need to look at the substance of the act itself. What does it cover and all that. So we while we've done with the penalty side, we want to work into the second phase to look at the crux of the legislation and how it applies. Because I do believe that we need more stringent legislation to make it more thorough and you know, to provide less room for developers or even government entities to get around this legislation.
Just to respond to the question forum. So you can look at one idea about whether we have a consultative group that's fixed, maybe elected, that can represent the people in some of these projects. Number two is what Minister mentioned about how we can enlarge the scope of the EIA, because EIA is only for certain major projects. And then looking at the punishment issue, I wanted to just add, before I forget, is that I think we need to start prosecuting more directors. So this is something that we have recommended in our 2-year report that we did, the National Baseline Assessment on the Environment. We think that there needs to be more resources in your ministry and in the law enforcement officers. They need to be upskilled. We need to have more of them. But we also need the prosecution to happen against the directors, because they already have statutory defenses of due diligence, but it's not tested in the courts. Because what is happening is that you're only prosecuting the companies. Companies are willing to just pay a high fine, and then they get off after pleading guilty. Sometimes there's no blacklist even. But directors, as we do training for even listed companies, they are not afraid. They are not afraid because they know that even though the law makes them personally liable for the acts of their companies, they know that there's no prosecution that's going to come. So I think that is something which government needs to look at, upskill, and maybe increase the number of prosecution officers, and maybe increase the number of cases where directors, where it's so serious, will be prosecuted. So have some sort of a criteria to see when and where directors are personally charged, so that at least they have to come to court and then have to defend themselves. Because the law now envisages for that, and maybe that's something that the ministry can consider in phase 2.
It's just now, YB, you mentioned about the issue of plastics in Ramadan Bazaar. And what YB, I also want to ask is that when we are trying to phase out the single-use plastics, what are the alternatives that will not, how to say, try to not as impact the bottom line of especially small traders? We mentioned about Ramadan Bazaars, because you know, for larger companies, they can just adjust a bit, but for small traders, when packaging is quite inevitable, then how are they going to adjust to alternatives? Will hurt a lot of their cost cash flow there.
40,000 ringgit for that 1 month. So any cost you incur, there are, I mean, say reusable bags or whatever, which are all, as of now, they are costlier than the single-use plastics. Even a truly biocompostable plastic is much more expensive than petrochemical-based plastic. So, of course, the ideal one would be to, I mean, you know, if everyone understands and, you know, they bring their own thing, that's the ideal thing, right? But I think the most important thing is, if, even for me, I mean, I'm being practical here, if we can start, we do have some pilot projects. In fact, I volunteered myself to show that, you know, even in my kawasan, I'm willing to take the risk. We are doing it in one or two of our bazaars. But I think the real thing is that we can just start with what we call with the fixed premises first, because that's the easier one. We are talking about the chains, and they are operating on huge revenues. So any 10, 20 cent addition per unit cost is a small addition for them, as opposed to the petty traders. So for us, I think that's still the more promising route compared to immediately going after you know, the bazaars. That one we try to do voluntary and all that. But going with the big businesses is still, I think it's fairer. I mean, if we talk about a just transition, it's a bit unfair to push it immediately on someone who's selling a nasi lemak and all that and say, oh, you have to be totally, you know, sustainable, when the big players are not even sustainable themselves. Because for the big players, it's much easier for them to do.
Testing 1, 2. YB, thank you so much, and for the panelists, a very insightful conversation, insightful information. My question is quite easy, actually. It's just the fact that the budget has been approved. I mean, they're going through now. My question is, from the ministry's point of view, how much money you plan to invest or want to invest in terms of creating behavioral change programs for the general public to actually accept that plastic.
Yeah, so the main thing for us, as I said, is to do the legislation for plastic, a national legislation. And we have a lot of legal brains here. So if you want to save the government money, you can volunteer pro bono. But anyway, I think we are trying to commission the study to do the legislation. And that actually, we are putting it under the 13 Malaysia plan rather than the budget. But we are trying to push it for it to happen as fast as possible. Because only when we have this legislation is that we can have a total approach. But the other things like the EPR, the recycling, that one is already moving. But I do believe that without that one overarching legislation, it will not be progressing at a fast enough pace. So we are looking at even product design, because we've seen the products that we buy, right? Some of it, the packaging is just so much. It's not totally necessary, but they just want to package it that way, right? Why? If you have to use plastics, why do you have to use so much plastics? Those are questions that we can all ask. So we are trying to look at it from the entire spectrum, so that will happen. I think that's all happening. But the main thing is the overall plastic legislation study under the 13 Malaysia Plan. So that's next year.
Thank you. Thank you for all those questions. We actually have come to the end of our
Insightful discussion. Another big round of applause. Okay, before we have the guided.
Thank you.
How we go?
We like the Greenpeace.
Closer.
Maybe just one with the speaker first. Yeah, and you moderate together.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, next can I have the co-organizers, collaborators,